This
And
time,
last we saw our intrepid hero.
you hear that?
He was dangling off the edge of a deadly crevasse, while the
Where's that
evil
coming from?
Dr. Deadline harassed him at his every turn. But days have passed. Has our hero plunged to his death?
I'm right here.
Will he ever finish that stupid helmet?
Hey, Sabine Wren's helmet is not stupid. I mean, a lot of people look up to that character.
These are answers we may never know.
Okay, it wasn't that dramatic. And it's more accurate to say that I left you hanging, having promised you a helmet that looked like this and only taking you about halfway there. But you know, sometimes things just take a lot longer to explain than you think they will. And what you think is going to be one video turns out to be 2 and maybe 3 videos worth of information. Let's hope not. But with that in mind, let's get back to work. Now that we have all the trim on, we can move on to the ears. Now what I have here is a piece of poplar in 1/2 inch, and you can get this true 1/2 inch poplar at a lot of the big box home stores now. I got this one at Home Depot. I have seen them at Lowe's in the past. That's what I would definitely suggest using. If you can find a true 1/2 inch thick piece of pine, that would also work. You might be able to find that in a hobby store. If you have to, you could also use a true 1/2 inch thick piece of basswood that you can also find at most hobby stores. I wouldn't go with the balsa wood just because it is so much softer that it may not be able to force the foam to contort to it instead of it shaping itself to the foam. But if at all possible, I would go with like this poplar that I got at Home Depot. And of course, any hardwood that you could find, as long as it's a true 1/2 inch or very close to it, that should be fine. I've taken my ear pattern and I've cut it into 3 pieces. And I'm going to start out with just this outside ring. I have it pinned on here, and I'm just going to trace around it. On the outside and the inside. Make sure that you're actually getting it up against the paper instead of, sometimes you can hit these pieces of the tops of the pin and it, you know, will throw you off. Now that I have that, I'm going to leave that where it is, and I'm going to move the centerpiece into place so that that piece of paper can hold it in place. And I'm just putting this in for reference later on. So you definitely want to make sure that you use ink on this. If you use pencil, there's a chance that it might rub off. So definitely use ink. And make sure you get a good line there. Now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and put this piece in place. And I've punched a little hole right here in these crosshairs. And I'm just going to mark that. You can remove this. And there are several different ways that you can go about cutting this out. Now the simplest way to cut this out is to just take your 1/2 inch wood, draw just this outside line on the back of the wood, and then cut it out on a bandsaw with the table set to 25 degrees. That's what I did here. I'm going to use this for the left side earpiece. For this one, I'll go ahead and do this a more manual way so that you can, see how to do this if you don't have a bandsaw. So the first thing you want to do is to use whatever means you have to cut this outside line. A coping saw works really well for this. A reciprocating skill saw works for this. A jigsaw, bandsaw, anything that you have. Would you go ahead and cut this piece out, and then we'll go on from there. I just wanted to mention that other than the bandsaw or the jigsaw, the best saw for this job is probably just one of these simple coping saws. They're cheap, They do a really good job. They're easy to control. But, you know, if you have a saber saw or a skill saw and that's what you want to use, then go for it. It'll work just fine. You can also use a disc sander to put the bevel into the wood. Just be sure if you go with any route where you're cutting that bevel directly into the wood while you're cutting it out, you need to put your pattern on the back of the wood. Because once you have the table tilted, if you put your pattern on the front of the wood and you get ready to cut it out, your bevel will be the wrong direction. So you have to put the pattern on the back. That way, as you cut it out, it will be the right way. Now that you have your piece cut out, we can start to bevel this edge in. You can do this several ways, or at least with several different tools. You can use the same sanding sticks that we made and worked on the foam earlier with. I'm actually I really like these microplane rasps. They do a really good job. You can also use various different kinds of files or rasps. It's whatever you've got. Just start out with your most aggressive, and what you're going to do is basically you're just going to take this edge off, being very careful not to go past this outside edge here, and don't go inside past your drawn line. And surprisingly, this will go pretty fast. Just be careful not to go past your lines. Once you start getting even a little bit close, you're going to want to go ahead and stop and go to a more gentle file or rasp. Or in my case, I'm just going to go on and do the whole thing, and then we'll come back to that. By the way, if you don't have a vise like this, your best bet is to take your file or rasp or sanding stick and lay it on the ground and, you know, rub this piece on top of it to get those edges. That's going to be more difficult, but you're going to have a really hard time filing this if you don't have some way to clamp it down. You can also just go get some cheap clamps and regular kind of a clamp, like a C-clamp, and clamp it down to a table. Let me go ahead and switch over to my sanding stick. If you notice you're getting right up against an edge in the front or the back, just change your angle so that you kind of pull away from the edge you're getting too close to. Actually, you have quite a bit of meat there. You can also use just regular files.
When I'm buying a file, I just like to take it and I kind of run my finger on there, and I want to feel it kind of bite in. Even a really fine file like this you should really be able to feel the way it bites in, kind of like a really coarse sandpaper. Whereas one that you can feel the texture, but it doesn't feel like there's any drag on it. I like to get the ones that really feel like you can feel the drag. If you start getting really close, just go slow and careful. Here I can see that the back, I've still got quite a bit of the back that I can take off. The front, not so much, so I'm going to angle a little bit more toward the back. Once I'm sure I've got everything pretty much removed, I'm going to go ahead and carefully remove just that little bit of wood that's left. Don't push too hard, because on the back edge or whichever edge where you're pushing toward, you can split the wood away, and you don't want to do that. Although that's more likely to happen with a rasp than with a file. Now we can just flip it over. Now that I have this cut out, I'm going to use my sanding sticks, not all of them, just my two finest ones. And I just want to smooth everything out. I want to leave this back edge as sharp as I can, but from there forward I want to just kind of round everything good. Don't get too out of control, but you just want to take this edge off. Beyond that, you just want to take out any unsmooth edges. Another way to do this, which works really well, is to use these foam sanding blocks. Because they're not rigid, they do a really good job of just taking hard edges off. Make sure not to remove your lines. Here we have the right side earpiece that will have the rangefinder attached to it. You're going to want to repeat the process so that you'll have two. On the left one, you don't have to have that center point like you do on the right. And at this point, if you're not happy with one of these, just keep working on it until you are happy. If you need to start over again, start over again. You'd be surprised how much quicker the second one goes. You know, when you make something a second time, it seems to take about half as much time as the first one. But make sure that you're happy with them, and then we can move on to the next step in the project. Okay, I've cut the other two pieces out now. You'll recognize these when you're looking at your templates. And if you want, you can go ahead and cut this part out as well, so you just have a ring, and bevel this exactly the same way you would with the other piece. But I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to cut this piece out and then just kind of round the whole thing off. And what I have here is another piece of poplar, but now it's only 1/4 inch. And once you have your pieces cut out, go ahead and mark your mark the wood. Be particularly careful with this line here and this line right here, because those are going to be the pieces that stop the rangefinder stalk from moving forward and any further down and any further back. And I'm going to take these off, and you can cut them out however you want to. After you cut these parts out, you're going to want to go ahead and smooth them. And this is probably the best way I can think of. Try not to round off the top or the bottom edges, because you don't want them to make a gap when you put the pieces together. You don't have to get this perfect by any means. You won't be able to do any real finish work on this until all the pieces are together. Okay. Don't forget to do 2 of these pieces, because you're going to need one for the other side. Now that I have this piece, I'm going to go ahead and round off the edges, very much like I did with the other earpiece, just not as much, and I don't have to worry about it as much. I'm just going to take a sanding block. You do the same thing with the sanding stick or a file. You can also use a Dremel tool. Now that I have it basically rounded off, I'm going to go ahead and take this foam sanding block and drop it on the floor. These foam sanding blocks are just the best thing I've found as far as rounding things off, because they're flexible, they don't make flat spots. And your other thing that you could do is you could do the exact same thing we did when we did the other part of the earpiece, and draw that inside line and bevel it. And you want to make sure, once again, not to round off this part right here. This piece will fit on top of that piece, and you want to make 2 of these. Now that you have all of the wooden components cut out and shaped, there's just a couple more things to do before we can put this together. And the first thing is, this is 2mm craft foam. It's just like the 5mm, just thinner. And I have my same pattern here that I used for these parts. And I'm just going to draw part of an outline here. I'm going to start in this top left corner area, and I'm going to come all the way around until I get to the bottom right corner area. Next, I'm just going to draw freehand a line, maybe 1/8 of an inch out from the first one. My pen's not working very well, but doesn't have to be exact, just try to give it a reasonably nice shape to it. And then we can go ahead and cut that out. Should probably be using a bigger blade than this. Not the prettiest thing in the world, but it'll work. And this is actually going to go just on the outside of that when everything's put together. And that's going to just give it a little bit of friction so that the rangefinder won't just fall down and be floppy. That'll keep it in one place. And finally, it's time to cut out the stalk for the rangefinder. Now you can make this out of that same 1/4 inch poplar or whatever you've used, to make these out of. I've definitely used wood in the past and it's been fine, but I have aluminum, so I'm going to go ahead and use this piece of aluminum. It's 1/4 inch thick. And I've cut out this part of my templates, and I've just taped it down in a couple places just to help hold it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to hold the end anyway, but at least that keeps me from moving it. And last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and make that mark. This is a punch. I'm going to use it to mark the aluminum. I'm just going to give it one good whack. And I can take this off. Now I just need to connect the lines. Now I'm going to cut this out using my bandsaw, and I've used a skill saw to do this, and it just destroys my blade. Hopefully it won't destroy the blade on my bandsaw. It's made to cut through aluminum up to 1/4 inch thick, so I think I'll be okay. If you don't have a bandsaw or a jigsaw that's designed to cut through aluminum, then I would suggest making this out of wood. It's really not that different. You can paint it, no one will really notice. I just like the texture that I can get with the aluminum by sanding it. So I'm going to cut this out and we'll be right back. Okay, whether or not you cut this out of aluminum or wood, just make sure that you round off the sharp edges when you're done cutting it out. And it's not just for protection. A sharp edge is always going to look flimsy compared to a rounded edge.
So it's just going to help this piece look more substantial if you round these corners off. So now that you have this, now if you're doing this in wood, you're going to want to go ahead and sand it with finer and finer or finer sandpaper until it's nice and smooth. You don't want to see a lot of fuzzy wooden texture on there. And if you're using wood, you don't have to, but you might want to go ahead and just give it a shot of silver spray paint at this point. We can go back later and do some more detail work on it, but you might as well start before you might as well start when you have access to this part that's going to be gone after you assemble the helmet. So the next thing we need to do now is to go ahead and drill the hole down here at the bottom. Okay, so let's get ready to drill this hole in the stalk for the rangefinder. You'll note that this rangefinder stalk is quite a bit smaller or thinner than Boba Fett's. So you're going to need to pick a fairly small bolt to secure it. I have an 1/8 of an inch bolt that's 2 inches long, which is maybe a little bit too long, but I wouldn't get anything shorter than 1 5/8 of an inch, which is about 4 centimeters long. That would be the shortest bolt that you can really get away with. So I have an 1/8 inch bolt, and so I've gone with a drill bit, which is just one step up from that, which is 9/64 of an inch. And now that I get ready to drill, I think I'm gonna have to move the camera. Okay. So ideally you'd want to use a drill press for this, but I don't have one, so there's no point. And you want to work really hard to make sure that you're going in as close to 90 degrees in both directions as you can get it. And when drilling metal, you always want to go slow. I'm going to use a small file and just clean off this a little bit. You don't want to try to remove any material, just take off those little burrs. And now this goes back into the vise. Okay, so the next step is going to be to mark the depth of the nut that you're using. You could measure as well, but this is just easier. I also want to see how far down this goes and mark that. Take this off. Doesn't have to be perfect, so I'm just eyeballing it. Okay, now I'm going to take a hacksaw and remove that part of the aluminum. It's just a little close for you to be able to see, but it's just a regular hacksaw. You can use a smaller one if you want. That's what you have. You know, I could go over to the bandsaw and do it, but you know, I've got this right here, so.
As you can see, it goes pretty quick. Now I can't cut this without hitting the camera, so let's see if I can just move this. Just go with little movements until you can get a little bit of a groove in there, and then you want to go with long. I've removed quite a bit of the aluminum, but in truth, this doesn't have to be very strong. So that's going to work out quite well, I think. It's a little bigger than it needs to be, but that's still okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a file and take these sharp edges off. You can also use sandpaper or your sanding sticks for this. It'll all work just fine. Great thing about aluminum is it's pretty much as easy to work with as wood is. Now, if you're making this out of wood, just make sure that it's a fairly hard wood, because this is so thin now. It's literally probably maybe 3/32 of an inch, not quite an eighth. And as long as it's a reasonably hard wood, that's plenty strong. If it's balsa wood or basswood, you're probably getting a little weak at that point. But if it's poplar or pine or oak or something like that, you shouldn't have any problems at all. This doesn't have to be pretty. It's going to be completely covered up. We're finished with that. Okay, now it's the earpiece's turn to get a hole. And all I've done is I've taken a regular nail, lined it up with the little mark that we made, and pushed it by hand in order to get this divot. That'll keep the drill from moving all over the place. Same bit. The only difference is that now I have it turned to the high speed for wood. And once again, you want to try to make it as square as possible. You don't want to move it around and make the hole any larger than it needs to be. I'm just going to check that. It's pretty close to square. Okay, now we can get ready to put this together. Okay, so the first thing we're going to attach is on the right side of the earpiece. We're going to put this little piece here that has the stops on it. And the first step is to get this lined up as best you can. We can come back and do any last minute shaping of it after we're about to put it on. So go ahead and hold it in place and mark it. This is just so we can know where to put the glue, and it'll also make it easier to put it back in the same location when we're actually gluing it on. Okay. You can see I ended up a little bit far that way, so I'm going to kind of split the difference. So now we're going to take the barge cement, flip this over. The wood is also porous, so we're going to do 2 coats of barge cement here, 2 coats of barge cement here, with the 10-minute drying window in between them, and then we'll be back to attach it. Okay, so these both have 2 coats of barge cement on them, and it's been 10 minutes since I put the second coat on. They're all quite dry. Just want to line it up as best I can. Now you might be asking yourself, why barge cement? Why not use wood glue or some other type of PVA glue? And you could use wood glue for this. It would work probably just fine, but I like the barge cement just because once I stick it on here, it's attached. I don't have to wait for it to dry. The other reason is the barge cement has a certain amount of flex to it. And if this gets hit with something, or the stalk for the rangefinder gets hit and it flexes a little bit, wood glue, this might just pop off. Whereas the barge cement has enough stretch to it that it'll just absorb that impact and it won't break. So I'm just making sure it's on here pretty well. Okay, now that we have this in place, we can go ahead and attach our little piece of foam that we cut out earlier. It's just going to go just like so, just on the outside of the line. And we can also, since we're gluing everything, let's go ahead and put our little left piece on our left ear. So you know the drill. 2 coats of glue along here, 2 coats of glue here, 2 here, and 2 here, and I'll be right back. Let's go ahead and assemble this. You want the end of this to line up with this piece here, just on the outside of the black line. Doesn't have to be right up against it. In fact, just a little bit outside of that would be preferable. Okay, let's go ahead and drop this in place. It's more important for it to look like it's straight than for it to line up perfectly with the outline that you've got there. And then just kind of push one edge down and then the rest of it. A little pressure on there and that one's in good shape. And we're not going to put this one on until it's actually on the helmet. So now we can go ahead and attach these to the helmet. So gluing the ear piece onto the helmet is fairly straightforward. But the first thing we want to do is to mark where we're going to put the glue. You want to try to line the ear itself up with this foam here, and it's going to seem like it's not going to work because basically the foam is distorted, it's all curved. So you kind of have to move it forward to get it in the right place. Let's say if you need to kind of like, push down so that this back lifts up and kind of get that in the right place. It's not going to be perfect. You just line the front edge up as much as you can and kind of make it as even as possible. What you don't want is for the wood to pass over the edge of the foam at any place. You don't want it to overhang, but you also don't want it to be too far from the edge either. And you also want it to be as straight up and down as you can get it with this line here. And I think I'm pretty happy with that right there. Now, when we glue this on, what we're hoping to achieve is that the wood's going to pull this foam up. Once it's glued on there, it'll hold that foam straight, which will flatten the whole side of the helmet out and make this boom come off in the right angles. But now that we have this side, let's do the left side. We're just going to do the exact same thing. That's just so I don't put glue everywhere, and also that'll help me to line that up better when I put it back on. So you know the drill again. 2 coats of glue here, and 2 coats of glue back here and back here. The glue's dry now, and we just have to stick these on. It's just a matter of lining it up. I'd try to line it up with this. Well, you have to line up at the back, but you need to make sure that it's not going to hang over the front. So just touch the corner to where you want it, and then you can roll it forward. Now it's not going to touch everywhere, so you kind of need to push the foam up so that it'll touch. And kind of hold it there for a second, because you really need that glue to get a good bite, a good hold of that. Okay. So it's got attached quite well now. We can go on to the other side. Do the exact same thing. Get it lined up as best you can. Just let the edge touch. That'll hold it in position, and then you can roll it forward. And then push the foam up to meet it and hold it there. Put as much pressure as you can easily. It looks good. If I need to, I can come back and trim this little bit of foam off. Okay, and there are the ears on. Next thing we need to do is to punch or drill a hole through the foam. Use the same drill bit you did in the wood, or you can even do one size smaller. There's not much. Okay, I have my pieces for the Rangefinder stalk. Which is my bolt, nut, and you want to make sure you get a good fender washer, some kind of a reasonably big washer to go on the inside. Okay, so just insert the bolt into there, and you may have to just kind of screw it. And then once you're sure it's all lined up, then push it through. Just get it finger tight, as tight as you can. And I just want to look and see the angles where it stops. And it looks to me like it's a little low forward and a little far back in the back. And the odds of you getting this perfect are very remote, just because there are so many variables. If you're just a little bit off in the position of the hole on the stalk, if you're just a little bit off on the position of the hole on the ear module, if you saw, if you cut this piece out just a little bit off, or if you glue it in slightly the wrong position. All of those things can make the stalk not go all the way vertical, go too far or not enough horizontal, and you just need to fine-tune it at this point. Now the easy way is, if it's not quite 90 degrees either vertical or horizontal, you can just take your X-Acto knife and trim a little bit of that wood off so that it's in the right place. In this case, it's too far in both directions, so that means that this is a little bit too low and too far back. But what I need to do is to just find some little pieces of scrap, and I'll glue those onto these two stops. It won't take much. I have various little pieces of scrap from when I was trimming out some of these other pieces. They're various thicknesses. And it's probably going to be too big no matter what. But these look like they're possible. And I just want to kind of hold this in the position that I want it to be. And I just want to put that in there. That's a little too small. That's even thinner. This is a little thicker. This might be a little too thick. Yeah, that's a little bit thick. Maybe I'll have to go with two pieces of this. So if I break two pieces of that, that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that position. So for the top, I'll go with two pieces of this wood right here, and do the same thing with the bottom. I want it to come out where it lines up with the, kind of line up with the point of the nose right here. But you don't want it to look like it's hanging low or high. It's a little too thick again. I wonder if it's the same on both. Let's try two pieces of this. It's not bad, it's a little bit too thick. So this really thin piece, let's see if one piece of the first and then one piece of the second one. I mean, I suppose you could actually measure it and try to cut a piece, but it seems like that's going to be very hit or miss getting it to begin with. I think you'll probably end up with some variation of doing what you're doing right now anyway. That looks pretty good. So now that I have these, I'm just going to take my knife and trim them up a little bit. If you don't have a surface to cut on, these mats right here work really well. If you get your EVA foam floor mats at Home Depot, like I did, you'll find these rubber floor mats. They're maybe 1/4 of an inch thick. They're very dense rubber. They're superb as a cutting surface, as a work surface. Glue doesn't seem to want to stick to them very well. I can peel it up pretty easily, and I haven't had any problem cutting on them at all. They're resistant to the X-Acto knife or these knives here. I just want to trim these so they're a little smaller. And you can glue these with barge cement if you want to. I'm just going to glue them with super glue. Super glue will be fast and should hold these little pieces of wood without any trouble. Here I'm just going to put a little drop. Give it a little bit of pressure. And you know what? I'm going to cut this a little bit. These are right at 1/4 of an inch thick because I cut them out of the same wood that I used to cut this out of. I'm going to trim that back a little bit so I don't have to worry about it being a problem when I put the cap on it. Probably a good idea to mark which one is going to be on the top, which one's going to be on the bottom. Since these are two different combinations of wood, then I know which one goes in the bottom, but it would still be probably a good idea to mark it. That was a fair amount of glue. Use this to push it down. I really like super glue, or CA glue, but it does stick to your fingers better than just about anything else. I should have put the glue on here. I have much less chance of gluing my fingers. Can you see that? Keep moving this out of the way. I'm sorry about that. So now I know this will go to the top and stay, and to the right place there. So I'm happy with the movement. Okay, now you want to go ahead and tighten this up fairly tight. I mean, nothing extreme. I'm just going to take a screwdriver and hook it onto the screw, and just with my finger holding the nut, I'm just going to tighten this up until it's reasonably snug. Okay. It'll stay wherever I want to put it now. And I need to cut off this excess bolt. And you can do it lots of different ways. One of the simplest ways would be just to use a hacksaw. You can also use a Dremel tool with the little disc cutter. Now have it off and kind of smooth it out with a file. So now I'm actually going to back this off a little bit. I'm not going to take the nut completely off. I just want to loosen it enough so that there's enough of a gap that I can drop a little bit of Loctite thread locker into there. Make sure you use the blue and not the red, because if you use the red and somehow you do need to take this off, you'll have to use a torch. And since your helmet's made out of wood and foam, that's not a very good idea. Now, screwdriver back on there. And I just want to make sure that it gets into the threads, and then I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up. What I'm trying to avoid here is basically having this unscrew as I slowly move this back and forth. I want to make sure that the nut and bolt are one solid piece and they move separately from the stalk. Now that I have that, I can go ahead and glue the cap on here. So that's going to be 2 coats of barge cement, and we can glue it on. Okay, so now it's just a matter of moving this into place. Okay, it's on. Okay, now as you can see, there's a little bit of an issue going on right now. Kind of like with the that we had with the prototype. This the rangefinder is kind of sticking out to the right and a little bit out when it's up. And before we can do anything with that, we're going to have to wait a couple of hours for all this cement to cure completely, and then we can work on that. While we're waiting for all this glue to cure up completely, let's turn our attention to the air vent. So I've cut out my template, including cutting out these little slits. I also folded it in half so that I could find the center points on the top and the bottom, and I marked those. So let's just carefully line up the center points and push this all the way to the top where it touches the the back trim, line up the bottom, center there with the seam that runs down the middle of the back. I'm just going to push a pin in there. Remember that when you push these pins through there, that they'll be sticking on the inside of your helmet, so don't reach your hand in there and impale your fingers. Now we can go ahead and mark this. Should be an easy process. Okay, so I have that marked. And remove the pattern. So you're probably asking yourself, why didn't we do that before we actually made the helmet? And the reason is, if you cut these lines in when this is flat, and then you form this into a helmet, these edges, instead of being straight here, are going to be bent out like that. So what we want to do is we want to go straight in, but we want to do it, let me see if I can make this look right on the camera. We want to make sure we're going straight in the direction that the helmet's facing, instead of 90 degrees to the surface of the helmet, which would be, we want to make sure that it goes straight in basically the direction that the helmet's facing. Because of the distortion in the camera lens, it looks like I'm coming in at an angle, but this is actually straight. So I'm going to pick the inside of that line, right up against the trim. Make sure that I'm cutting straight in toward the front of the helmet. And I'm just going to saw back and forth until I can get the blade in all the way. Almost there, not quite. There we go. Now, once you have the blade in, makes you feel better. The angles here. I just want to do long, smooth cuts. Right up against that line. And then just repeat it on this side. So again, I'm just making very small back and forth movements so that it can plunge into the foam. And now I'm going to make smooth but long strokes. Try to keep it up against the line like I did not do. Now I just want to cut right along this back trim. So I did not do the best job, but it's still going to work just fine. Take this piece out. And what you're going to do is you'll be able to just push this piece in about half the depth of the foam, and then we'll re-glue it. Because I have such a bad seam right here, I'm going to actually use a separate piece of foam that I cut out and insert it in there, pushed halfway back. See, so there's flush. We're just going to push it half the width of the foam in, and then we'll re-glue it in that position. I'm going to take my sanding sticks and I'm going to smooth out this line right here. I'm going to go ahead and do it on the other sides, but to a lesser extent, just to smooth things a little bit. Okay, now that you have your piece cut out, you have a decision to make. There are various ways of cutting these lines into the air vent assembly, whatever you want to call this. Here's a sample here. First, you can actually, just like we're going to do with this piece, you can cut it out, pull it back, and glue it back into position. It gives you probably the squarest section. The downside is that you can see these little spots where the blade kind of cuts past the corners, and it's going to be very difficult to not do that. To cut this out, basically I've used a small, I think it's the number 6 X-Acto knife blade. Just make sure it looks like this, and use that to cut the ends, and then I just used my regular knife here to cut the sides, or the top and the bottom, and then pull it out, put a couple of little drops of super glue, and push it back in from the back. The other downside of this is that there's a good chance you're going to get super glue all over your hands, so wear gloves. The second one is what I did here. This is from a wood burner. It's got the sort of calligraphy or chisel nose piece on there, and I've just basically burned that across using a metal ruler as a straight edge. Now that has the advantage of not having any overcuts. It's fairly straightforward and quick to do, and you don't have any glue to deal with. Downsides are you get this sort of texture, can be kind of jagged on the inside, and you can mitigate that by using more heat, but that in turn has more of a chance of expanding the the hole quite a bit. As you get more heat, it kind of melts more and more of the foam that you're not trying to melt. And the third process is to just leave it painted on and not have any real relief at all. All of them can work, and it's kind of up to you as what you want to do. I'm going to go ahead and do the wood burner on mine, just because trying to get them all equal and the same, it's going to be a lot less likely to do if I'm trying to cut them all out. There's more likely to get weird shapes and lots of overcut marks. I think it's going to be easier to make. It's going to be easier to keep this consistent using the wood burning tool, I think. Now, this is a pretty simple wood burning tool. I think I got this at Michael's. I've seen them as cheap as $7. They're not particularly expensive, and they're quite handy. You can use them for a lot of different things. This one has variable temperatures. It has a little dial here. I have my dial, so it's between it's right on the edge between the bright yellow and the darker yellow. And for this tool, I find that's a good temperature. Now you're going to want to, if you go this route, you're going to want to make several test runs on some scrap foam just to make sure that the temperature is right. And you want to make sure to plug this in and let it heat up for maybe 10 minutes just to make sure that it's up to the right temperature. If you just plug it in and wait 20 or 30 seconds and then try to use it, it's not going to do very much, and then you turn the heat up, and then by the time it heats up enough, it's just going to get much hotter and it's going to be hard to control. So set your temperature, give it 10 minutes, and then if you find it's too hot or not hot enough, then change the temperature and wait maybe 5 minutes. Now that I have this, I'm just going to line my metal ruler up. I'm going to try to do this as smoothly as I can. I'm going to plunge it in, and then using the ruler as a straight edge, I'm going to slowly sweep it across. Try to be consistent with the speed that you're moving it. I need to go a little bit further. Okay, there's one. So let's try it again. Line my straight edge up, plunge it in, slowly, but try to be as consistent with your speed as you can. Because if you go fast, you're going to end up with a different width than you would if you went slow. If you go shallow, you get a little bit cleaner edges. When you go deep, you get a little bit deeper edge, more rounded ends on it. It's also good to make several just practice runs. And if you mess this up, you can just cut out another piece. However, I'm fairly happy with this. I think it's going to work fine for what it is. And so I'm ready to go ahead and put this on the helmet. Okay, so now I have my gloves on because I'm going to be working with glue. And you want to slide it I would say you want to slide this to where it's almost going to fall out on the inside. So you push it almost all the way through the foam. And then I'm going to take my super glue and I'm just going to run a bead down one side and down the other, and I'm going to push it about halfway back. You want to work fairly fast at this point. Try to get it to be somewhat consistent. You've got a spot that has already dried and is in a bad place, you're going to need to go ahead and just break it loose. And there's just one little piece there that was stuck. Okay. You can do this with hot glue as well. That's what in fact, if you watch the Boba Fett video, you'll find that I used hot glue on this. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm just going to take the super glue and I'm just going to squirt a line of it right down the edge. On both sides. You can do the top and bottom if you want. It's probably not that important. Now, this is important. Now, since you've used super glue, you do not want to lay the helmet down like that, because super glue fumes will just kind of float around and they will attach themselves to smooth surfaces, especially they like polycarbonate and plexiglass surfaces. So if you just put that on there and close that helmet up, there's a good chance that the glue will actually sort of frost the inside of your visor, and that's not going to make you very happy. So leave it on its side and open, or even up like that. And now we're just going to go ahead and finish waiting for the glue that we used to glue the ear modules onto to cure completely, and we'll go on to the next step.
Unfortunately, it looks like it will take 3 videos for me to get part 3 uploaded. So you'll have to wait for part 3C to finish the rangefinder and adjust the angle of the ears. It just didn't seem like it was that much work when I was doing it, but I don't want to cut anything out, so 3 videos it is. If you have any questions or comments, please leave me a comment below and I'll do my best to help. As usual, if you've enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please give it a like, as that helps keep me motivated. And subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming videos where we finish and paint Sabine's helmet, as well as the rest of hers, Boba's, and Django's equipment. I look forward to the next video, and until then, thanks for watching.